Today, I want to talk to you about this. Now, this is probably a brand that if you are in the US, you would know very, very well. Outside of the US, you're probably not likely to know it, but you would know an equivalent of it. So today I'm going to talk about the time I was the sole iOS programmer building iHeartRadio. So this story starts off in 2010. I'm not too sure exactly what happened beforehand, but in a nutshell, here's what happened as far as my interpretation of events went. So I was working for a consulting company in Toronto, and through a contact who was working at Clear Channel, which owned iHeartRadio, they had a situation where they, as an emergency, needed an iOS programmer to take over a project. Now, I had never heard of Clear Channel at this point, and I had definitely never heard of iHeartRadio. So, long story short, next thing I know, I'm in New York and I'm getting up to speed on a project which to me looked to be in disarray, and there's a lot of people involved in this. So it was a bit of a larger project than what I would normally be used to. But having said that, like, nothing about it seemed to be, you know, very over my head or anything like that. Like, everything was possible as far as, like, when I looked at the project, everything looked as if it was within my skill set. It just seemed to be a very, very badly, you know, organized situation that I was being thrown into. Fast forward a couple of weeks and I got up to speed and I understood what the project was. So just to quickly explain it to you, if you're not aware of iHeartRadio. So here's the 30-second version of what was going on. You had a radio conglomeration, which at that point in time probably had around 750 radio stations. It was horribly in debt. There was a buyout that really put a strain on the company. For one reason or another, they had all of the various radio stations all branded under this iHeartRadio brand, and there was supposed to be a mobile application for Android, for BlackBerry, for iOS, for, you know, whatever. Yeah, that's what I got thrown into. So that's the 30-second version of events. What I didn't know at the time was I was being thrown in as one person to support 4 million users at that time, and there was originally supposed to be more programmers, but I guess because of cost-cutting measures or whatever, they thought that I could handle the entire thing on my own. And this was both the best and worst situation that I could possibly find myself in. If there's one thing I've noticed over the years, is that I grow most when things are going horribly wrong. When things are really, really great and I'm just coasting, I'm not learning anything, I'm just coasting. When things are really, really bad and I'm put under stress, that's when I grow. And that's what happened with iHeartRadio. Like, I was a competent iOS programmer. It had been out for a couple of years at that point. I knew what I was doing. What I was not competent at was rolling out that much code that fast, that quickly to that many people. Further, this was the first time that rather than just having one manager or two managers to report to, all of a sudden I had like a committee of people and they all had their own agenda and everybody was trying to get you on their side to try and get something done. So you had the people who were like, okay, the user interface sucks, this, that, and the other sucks, the experience sucks, we're going to fix that. And then you got the other people on the other side going like, no, we're going to leave that as is. We want more advertising, more metrics, more advertising, ways of getting more advertising in there. Advertising, advertising, advertising. Like, that was their mantra. Then you got other people from the technical side going like, well, you know, it's causing a strain on our servers, so we need to get the infrastructure pulling data a bit better. We need, you know, different ways of marshalling data backwards and forwards. Like, everybody had a competing viewpoint of what this project was supposed to be about. And then we still had the people that I'm reporting to, and their basic story to me is like, don't mess this up. Like, you know, you have to keep this going. The entire company depends on this. Like, we need you to just stay there and just milk it. So, as you can guess, like, I got a little bit stressed out by this. So what would generally happen is somebody would come up with this fantastical idea about this is what we're going to do for the next version, and they never speak to any engineers, no programmers were involved or anything like that. Maybe a user interface designer was consulted and they would come up with some brand new fancy UI that was going to do something amazing and win over the customer and everything else. And then it would get dumped on my desk and it would be like, okay, we need this in 3 weeks' time. And I'd be looking at it going, you know, like, it was just like, that's not possible. So obviously it was possible, and the way it's possible is when you're a single person doing the work of 3 people, and you've got a very, very tight deadline. You work weekends, you work nighttime, you basically work like a dog. Now, obviously, this then caused a stress and strain, because if anything went in the slightest bit wrong, and anybody that's ever done software development knows that when the management give you, here's the finish line where you're getting to, you'll get about halfway towards that finishing line and they'll move it. So, when they move it, I've still got to try and meet that deadline, and then they'll move it again, and then there'll be some fighting, and now you've got 2 deadlines and you're not too sure which one you're supposed to be going for. Meanwhile, when things invariably do go wrong as a result of that, the customer goes complaining to your boss. Next thing you know, your boss is crapping on you, even though it's not your fault. So, it was the whole iHeartRadio thing that I really learned what it was to be a good boss. Because basically, the way you be a good boss is I look at everything I went through during that year, and it's like, you don't do that, you don't do that, you don't do that, and you don't do that. Like, that is basically, as I said, you learn more during the bad periods than you ever learn during the good periods. Nobody tells you how to be a good boss other than, treat people with respect, treat people fairly, treat people with equality. That's all well and good, but what they don't tell you is you can still be fair and give them equality and respect, but you can still mess it up in other ways. So getting back to the app, I was based in Toronto in Canada. The people that I'm working for are based in New York, and this causes a bit of a problem because you can't have radio stations in the US available to people outside of the US, under licensing that music wasn't supposed to be played outside of the US, yada yada yada. The first thing I had to do was basically hack the app to allow me to be able to run it outside in Canada, even though everybody else coming into Canada, it would not work for them. So that was my first job. The second job was get used to the app, because anybody that's known me, when I throw myself into something, I tend to go all in on it. That's how I normally end up winning at stuff, is because I go all in and I really try my best. The first thing I did was I started using the app on a daily basis and tried to get used to it, tried to get to the quirks and work out what is it as a user that people would want. Now, this was before iOS 4.2, so we didn't have background audio. The only thing that had background audio back in those days was Safari. And if you had this app in the foreground and then you sent it into the background because you needed the calculator or something, then invariably it would stop. So my first goal for the product, outside of being able to run it myself in Canada, was fix the audio. Of course, the minute I managed to fix the audio and make sure that the audio channels were working properly, and it was able to duck when there's pings and notifications and stuff, the first thing the management said was, oh, this is great and everything, now we need all this other advertising stuff thrown in as a priority. And what I was quickly finding out was there was a lot of upset users. And when I say a lot of upset users, it was tens of thousands of people were very, very upset about how the app just worked. A lot of people said it sucked, and I actually agreed with them. It did. So what I ended up doing was, quite often I would broker a discussion with some of the management at Clear Channel, going okay, look, you want this advertising, you want this, that and the other, you need these metrics and things and stuff. I will try to get that in, but can I put in something that I think is going to be of value to the user? And they would always be okay, tell me what it is that you want to do. So the first one I did was, it would be nice when the phone rings that it pauses the radio station, the phone rings, when you hang up or you discard the phone call, how about the radio station starts up again where it left off? Now, this was actually a 2-part problem, because the first one was it had to be able to pause and restart, but the second one was if you didn't want to miss anything, like you're halfway through your favourite song, we needed to buffer some of that up. Riding off the back of that was another big pet peeve of mine. It would be nice to be able to pause the radio using my headphones, cross the road without the audio playing so I can hear the traffic, and then start it on the other side. So the two problems are linked. Being able to cross the road, pause your radio, and then pick it up on the other side is exactly the same mechanism under the hood as what we were going to use when the phone rings and you take your call and then pick up the radio on the other side of the call. Depending on if your call was 10 seconds or 10 minutes, it would either keep the radio or it would discard it. And I think, if I remember rightly, the discard was about 45 seconds. seconds, and the reason for that was mainly just because of the buffering that was going on in the background. Like, yeah, there was just no point in keeping it going after 45 seconds because it was taking up quite a lot of RAM. What I then found was, the feedback coming through the iTunes store, people were very, very happy about the fact that they could pause their radio, and if they double clicked, instead of going to the next MP3, they were going to their next favorite radio station. Like, people loved this stuff, and so we were getting praise for that. But of course, nobody was ever praising, more advertising, more metrics. Like that just wasn't happening. After about 9 months or so, I obviously hit a breakdown. There was just far too much work, far too much pressure, and I was doing the work of 3 people, and I was working weekends, and I was working night times, and I was working on the plane, and I was working in the office, and there was just all of this work going on. And when you're trying to keep that many people happy, it's going to end in tears for somebody. And in that case, I ended up just absolutely breaking down. I had a bit of a mental breakdown, and it was just not something that was possible. So I always look at this iHeartRadio stuff. Of course, now they've renamed it iHeartMedia. I've always looked at it in a very sort of tinted light, because on the one hand, it was something that I could put down on my resume going forward, that, hey, look, I did this. In a company that was like 50,000 people, I'm the only iOS guy, and everybody knows the product. If I screw up, everybody knows about it, and the 4 million people outside the company knows about it. Every time I squeaked or moved or changed something, there would be a write-up in a technical magazine or on a tech website or something like that. People were very, very interested in what was going on. What they didn't know at the time was the struggles that were happening behind the scenes. So there's a funny story behind this. I used to have to fly into New York on a regular basis, and one time I was flying into Newark Airport, and there was a guy called Zeidy that used to pick me up. I'll come to him in a minute, but anyway. So I was flying into Newark, and I would then have to go to the iHeartRadio office at 32 6th Avenue. So I get stopped at immigration, and the immigration customs guy, he's like, "Why are you here?" And I'm like, "I'm here for an emergency. It's to do with iHeartRadio." And the guy's like, "What do you have to do with iHeartRadio? You've just flown in from Toronto. You've got an English accent. How can you possibly have anything to do with this?" So I said to the guy, it's like, "I'm the programmer." And he's like, "You can't be. There's no way that you've got all these people running an app being built by an English guy in Canada. That just is not going to happen." So I said to him, "I can prove it." And he goes, "Oh yeah?" And I said to him, "Do you run iHeartRadio on your phone?" And he's like, "Yes." I'm like, "Is it an iPhone?" And he's like, "Yes." So I told him, it's like, you go to the settings screen, there used to be a tab bar along the bottom. It's like, go to the last tab item, turn the phone upside down, give it a shake, and then a new button would appear. So then you tap the new button that suddenly appears whilst the phone is upside down after you've shaken it on the last screen. And at that point, you can get into the debug information that only I knew about. And so at this point, the guy was like, he goes, "Are you here to fix this particular issue?" And I'm like, "Yes." And the trouble is, it's not my bloody code that's failing here. It's the guys in New York, and this is why I'm here, because I need to prove that to them. So at this point, the guy's like, "Stamp, okay, have a nice day." The next time I come through Newark, I'm looking along all of the lines to see which guards are on. I see the same guy again. And so, of course, naturally, I get to the front, the wicket, and the guy's like, "I know exactly why you're here." Boom, have a nice day. So this became a bit of a thing. Every time I would go there, and of course, the times when he wasn't on the immigration wickets, I would be like, okay, now I've got to queue up with everybody else, and have to go through all the questions and whatnot. So it turned into a fairly good thing from that standpoint. So the first time I would have come into LaGuardia because I was on a different flight. Rather than flying out on Porter, I think I was on Air Canada, like one of the Jase flights or something. So anyway, I ended up going into LaGuardia, and this is where I met Zeidy. Now, Zeidy was a great driver. I loved this guy. He was, number one, very, very intelligent. Number two, a very good driver, and his cars were spotless. So obviously, this is not an advert for Zeidy Limo, but if you ever have to fly into New York and you need a limo company, and you need somebody who's professional and has good cars, and this guy, after flying very, very early in the morning and arriving at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning in New York, to jump in the car and have a paper ready for you and have bottles of water and have all your chewing gum and all the other things that you might possibly need. Like, I love this guy. Like, he was great. So anyway, Zeidy would drop me off there, and depending on how the day went, like, you know, let's say on some of the more extreme days, I would arrive at 9 o'clock in the morning and be done by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So then, because my flight isn't until 5 or 6 o'clock at night, I would just basically go around the corner to an Irish bar, have a couple of beers there, and then once I had a couple of beers, I'd just text Zeidy, and basically this guy in the peak cap would turn up outside of the bar, and I'd just jump in the limo and away we go. So I used to love this guy. He was great. I quickly looked up to see if he's still around, and yes, he is. His Facebook page is up, so I'm going to put a little link down below, and by all means check him out if you're ever flying into New York. So getting back to the story of the iHeartRadio and the programmers. I had taken over because the previous programmers, for one reason or another, had been canned, and ultimately what ended up happening was about a year and a half or so after I took over the project, they decided that rather than having all of their programmers work external to Clear Channel, they were going to start hiring people internally again. So at that point, I transitioned out of the project, and I never had to work with them again. In Canada, so what I found with the Bell radio systems was, they had absolutely no security on any of the radio streams or anything like that. So I just aggregated all the radio streams into my own app, and I added this one feature that I always wanted in the US, which is, I want to see what's playing on a radio station across the entire country before I go to that station. So this is the feature that I put into my own Bell radio, which I used to run. I don't run it any longer. I just stopped listening to radio, which is a shame because I actually used to like listening to radio, and that's the story for another day. But so anyway, that's the story of how I ended up supporting 4 million Americans and their radio habits, and the fight that happened within Clear Channel and iHeartRadio. And I learned more in that sort of year or so about how management should be working, because I could see everything that was going wrong. And so anyway, that is the story for today. I hope you found that one interesting. If you have any questions, ask them down in the comments, and I will attempt to answer them as best as I can. I do actually have enough material kicking around on this one that I could probably do a follow-up video if there's enough questions on it. So anyway, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button, and thanks for watching. See you soon. Okay, bye.